Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming and welcome to another lecture in this year's Remembering and Forgetting series brought to you by the Royal Institute of Philosophy. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Professor Alessandra Tanesini from the University of Cardiff. Alessandra is known for her work on emotion, in political discourse, on memorialization, on arrogance and humility, on feminist epistemology, and a little bit earlier in your career on the philosophy of language. Her most recent book, correct me if I'm wrong, is from OUP in 2021. It's called The Mismeasure of the Self, a Study in Vice Epistemology. And those of you who are familiar with the field of virtue epistemology will understand how daring a title that is. And as her website also reveals, she's a sailor and a self-confessed wine buff. Good for you. This evening, her talk will be about remembering online. Alessandra, over to you.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, everybody, for being here on such a cold night. And if I shiver, it's because I'm freezing cold. So I do not know what was on, the little blurb about this talk. You know the way you go, they invite you to give a talk like 1.5 years from now, and you think, I'm going to talk about this and then that and then that. Then you write the abstract saying, I'm going to cover everything. And then you start writing the talk and say, I haven't got 3 days. What shall I do? Right, so if you've read the abstract, I'm covering maybe 15% of what I said I would be covering. So apologies for that. But it's still on the same topic, right? I haven't forgotten. So in the abstract, I said that I would talk both about digital archives and social networking sites. I discovered that I really could only talk about the latter in the allocated time. And so it's going to be how we remember and forget on social platforms primarily. But if people want to discuss digital archives as well, then we can talk about it in the Q&A. So if there is anything that you want to take home from this talk, I can explain you those 4 points, and then you can fall asleep for the rest of the talk if you want to. So the 4 points are this, that remembering, it's something that human beings, and I'll say a little bit more about why, always do by relying on aids. These aids I call scaffolds, and I'll give you examples of what they are. But basically, we remember by relying on things that help us doing the remembering. That's the first point. The second point is that the tools or aid we rely on to do our remembering in many ways shape what we can remember and how we can remember. That's not to say that they determine what we remember or forget. There is a role for human agency, of course. But nevertheless, these tools put limits, constrain what you can remember and how you can remember it. And also, might at times facilitate forgetting certain things, right? Might make it hard to remember certain things. And social media platforms and online platforms in general are, among other things, tools that assist memory, scaffold or enable memory, but they also scaffold and enable forgetting. And the focus on my talk is on how remembering and forgetting on social networking sites, so Facebook, Instagram, X, and so on and so forth, facilitate a certain kind of memory and obstruct a certain kind of memory in such a way that using social media to remember changes our conception of the self. So we'll argue that the more we put our memories online, the more we'll change the way in which we remember our own lives and our very conception of what it is that we are about. And in particular, I hope to convince you that it makes a difference in two specific ways. One, we become more, I will say, connected selves, so selves that are connected to many other people, but less of a collective self. Our own memories will tend to be less shared to the extent to which we make our memories online. And the second way in which remembering online shapes our conception of the self, I argue, is that it makes us more episodic and less diachronically narrative. And I will explain what that means. But it makes a conception of the self where your life is more like, I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that, and then I did that, and less of a narratively structured conception. This is a matter of degree, point number one, and it depends on different individuals, but also it depends on how you use social media. But the other thing that I haven't got time to get in, but I want to put in right from the start, is this is not necessarily worse, right? It's just different. It might be better, it might be worse. People might have very different views of whether it's better or worse. But it's different, and that's all I'm going to say. And then it'd be interesting to hear whether, if you're convinced that it makes this kind of difference, whether you think it's a good difference, it's just a difference, or is a bad difference. Right, so that basically are the main points of the talk. And I'm hoping to get into some detail about each one of them. But this gives you a flavor of what the talk is about. So let me say a couple of very brief things about what memory is and what it is for. And I do this because I don't know any of you, so I don't know what you do, who you are. If here there are people who focus on the study of memory, I'm sorry that I'm teaching you to suck eggs. But, you know, so human memory is a very varied thing, right? And I'm going to talk only about one or two types of memory. So first of all, there is long-term memory and short-term memory, right? And then in long-term memory, there is procedural memory, which is knowing how to do stuff, right? You remember how to change an anode, I don't know, on a boat, right? That is procedural memory, it's knowing how to do something, right? Then there is semantic memories, which is knowledge of facts, right? So you might remember that the Norman invasion was 1066, right? I think it was, and it was in Sicily as well, which is interesting. Right, that is an example of semantic memory. You know a fact about the past. And then there is episodic memory. It is still a matter of dispute whether any other animal on this planet, apart from human beings, has episodic memory. Some people, well, of some animals we just don't know enough, like do whales have episodic memory? God knows. Some people think that some apes do. Episodic memory is when you revisit events in your own personal past by almost imagining yourself back there, right? Several cognitive psychologists think that episodic memory is a kind of mental time travel. You sort of remember being there in the past. And there is empirical evidence that the same circuitry, so to speak, the same neuronal areas that subtend imagination also subtend episodic memory. And also thinking about the future in terms of when you're trying to figure out what the right thing to do if certain situations occur. And so this episodic memory is like traveling back in the past, okay? And you can only have episodic memory of things, true episodic memories rather than false, of events where you've actually been there and you have these episodic memories as if you were back then. Autobiographical memory is a sum of episodic and semantic memory. So autobiographical memory is my memory of my past. Some of it is episodic, right? Some of it is the sort of thing that I remember being there. You know, I can recollect, I can relive those episodes. And some is semantic memory, because there are certain things about my past that I do not remember that way, but that my parents have told me are true of me, and they have become part of my life story, even if I can't remember them episodically in that way. Okay. This talk is exclusively about, primarily really, about semantic memory in general and autobiographical memory specifically. And so about episodic memory as well, insofar as episodic memory is a component of autobiographical memory. Is that clear so far? Right. So again, here I don't know whether I'm teaching people to suck eggs, but I'll try to be fast. So there is I don't know whether this is true anymore, but there certainly used to be a myth that human memory is about, you know, you have an experience, you store it in your brain in some way. That's the bit, the remember, and then you bring it to consciousness again. Is the idea, if you want, the metaphor of the human brain as an archive where you store your memories, right, there for retrieval. And so the idea would be that you have an experience, then you store this knowledge, you know, what it was like in your brain, as if it were an archive, and then you retrieve it. There is tons of evidence that that picture is mostly wrong. Human memory is largely a constructive process. Some people claim that there is no storage at all. I don't think you need to be that extreme. But largely, memory is a constructive process. So, broadly speaking, right, we have, if you think of episodic memory, we have an experience. Only certain aspects of the experience, the ones that at that point in time are perceived as being salient, are committed to memory. That commitment to memory partly involves a condensation process before the memory is stored. I'll give you an example, and you might have had similar experiences. So when I was a kid, my parents always took me to the seaside every summer. And because we are Italians, we always went to exactly the same place, you know, because everybody else went to also, so that they could just meet each other. And so you had these summer friends and you were always there. So you pretty much experienced the same things every summer, right? And so when you were committing to memory, right, that storage scene was just yet another summer day at the seaside, right? That process where the memories of that day get condensed with the memories of every other day that was exactly like that day. And it's that condensed, right, memory that is stored. Once it's in storage, the memory can fade or be strengthened depending on, you talk to your sister who says, oh, do you remember that day? And by her saying, do you remember that day, the memory of that day gets retrieved and becomes stronger. The stuff that doesn't get retrieved fades. Somebody might tell you, do you remember we did that? But they are mistaken and you acquire false memory, right? And then you retrieve your memories depending on what your current interests are at that point, right? And again, what you retrieve or don't retrieve changes. So with the episodic memory, if you think of the process of condensation and the process of influence of other people telling you, it could be that your memory at the end is much more the process of other people telling you stuff and the condensation with events other than actually anything that really is traceable causally to that event. You might remember that day at the seaside, but actually the things, the traces that are stored in your brain actually concern the testimony of your sisters who were there, concern other days at the seaside, and so on and so forth, right? And so the process of remembering is largely a process of constructing memories that is highly selective. There's tons that you remember and tons that you don't remember. That is permeable to post-memories, right? So much of our memories get consolidated and shaped by what other people who were there might tell us about that event, and I'll give you other examples. Or people who are ill-intentioned might tell us, right? False memories are very easily implantable. And so, you know, it might be that your memory becomes a mismemory because it's been deeply influenced by other people who've told you false things about that event. And our memories trade precision for accuracy. So you might remember that your sister was wearing a dark jumper, but you might not remember the color, right? So often our memories, we don't have memories that are detailed in that way, but they are nevertheless precise, right? No, I should say they trade accuracy for, so they're accurate even if they're not precise, sorry, it's the other way around. They're accurate, dark, right? But not precise, you don't remember it was blue, right? And condenses information. So you remember that event, right? That time you went swimming with your summer friend, but actually that memory condenses many days when you went swimming with your summer day friend. So you might think, right? Isn't this weird in some ways, right? Here is a human cognitive faculties which we take to be for the purpose of preserving the past or for the purpose of having accurate knowledge of the past, and yet is mostly using the same parts of the brain that are used for memory, is incredibly permeable to influence, is extremely selective, and it's easily lost. That is very weird, right? Because if you think of selective processes, you would think, why would something that is so maladaptive, right, for knowledge of the past be surviving? And that's because there are reasons to believe that human memory did not evolve for the purpose of giving knowledge of the past, but human memory likely evolved for social purposes. I want to give you a sense of why. I mean, this is not waterproof argument, and there is, you know, it's not a matter of consensus. Some people will disagree. But let me give you another example to try to sort of convince you that it's not implausible that the main purpose of memory is not knowledge of the past. I don't know whether you have ever been to school reunions, but even if you haven't been to school reunions, you must have been to events with people that you haven't seen for a long time, but that you used to know reasonably well, right? And often at these events, perhaps because people don't know what to say, but people start reminiscing. They start remembering things, right? But what they reminisce about is what all of them know, right? So you would think, right, that if sharing memories was about knowledge of the past, you would think people would get together and say, I haven't seen you in 10 years. This is what happened in the last 10 years that you don't know about. But instead, people engage in the activity of remembering, and it's something that people really like to do at these events, especially if, you know, if you don't really have much in common anymore with these people, right? If they are your real friends, you want to know what's happened to them. But if they are not your real friends, but you're trying to oil, you know, the social bonds, what do? You reminisce together. Why? Because the point of doing that is you feel together. You have something in common now, right? So one of the purposes of social memory is, one of the purposes of memory is to strengthen social bonds. Another purpose of human episodic memory is to get a sense of who one is and what one is about. So our memories are an important part of our autobiographies, and our autobiographies are a way of understanding who we are and what we are about, what we care for, right? And so memory seemed to serve two purposes primarily, also the purpose of knowledge about the past, but two purposes primarily, episodic memory at least. One is strengthening social bonds, and the other providing the building blocks for people's stories about themselves. That is not to say that we don't use memory to know about the past, but people have argued that it is an adaptation. You know, that is, human memory evolved for these other social purposes, and then has been co-opted for the purpose of remembering, knowing the past. But it's extremely frail, is not robust for achieving this purpose. And so from time immemorial, we have used aids or scaffolds to help memory serve well as a way of knowing the past. And if this is right, this might give you some idea why memory would be so permeable to influence, why memory would be so frail by itself in achieving successfully and reliably the purpose of accurate knowledge of the past. And so, how do we remember the past, really? If human biological memory is not very good at it, how do we remember the past? Well, we do it by means of the use of scaffolds or aids or tools. Some of these tools are actually tools that support human biological memory. So think of rhymes, right? So think of oral cultures where people remember their culture and their tradition orally, right? So they were people whose job it was to remember the stories. And the stories usually had several features, but two important features were they rhymed. Rhymes help you remember, right? And they also were structured by tropes, right? So if all the structure pretty much had, here was a disaster, and then the person arrives, and these are our savior, and then they fight against evil, and then they prevail. You have a sort of trope that helps you remember the stories because they all go similar ways, right? In Shakespearean times, actors could remember hundreds and hundreds of comedies, and people wonder, and tragedy, and people wonder, how could they remember all of this stuff? Well, they could remember partly because they all had these tropes, and because they had all of these scaffolds that helped them remember, right? And so one of the ways in which human memory is scaffolded is simply by means of certain uses of language, right? But also by various mnemonics, right? How do you remember which days, which months of 31 days and which don't? The knuckles, January, February, and so on, right? And so we always rely on tools to strengthen human memory. We also rely on evocative objects, right? Think of photographs. Photographs not as reportage, but photographs that parents take of their children when they're young, right? Those photographs are tools that will enable, in the future, people to remember that event, right? And so they are so-called evocative objects, souvenirs, right? Why do people go to a country and buy trinkets, right? Often really ugly trinkets, right? Well, because by looking at the trinket is a cue that will evoke the past. It will help you remember things that otherwise you will not remember, right? But we also use archives and books and so on, and those tools do not scaffold human biological memory, right? They bypass it. You don't have to remember, you can write it down. Okay. And the same is true of diaries, calendars, notebooks, right? Phone numbers. Who remembers a phone number anymore, right? So people used to remember phone numbers. The only phone number I remember for 30 years was my parents' phone number, which now has changed. So there isn't a single phone number, apart from my own, that I remember. People used to remember phone numbers, right? But now that we have smartphones, we don't need to remember phone numbers, and so none of us do, right? But there is a sense in which we still know, actually, we remember more phone numbers than we ever did, right? Our phone remembers for us. What that means is that you don't need to remember. All you need to be able to do is operate your phone, be able to see the number, right? And that's it. You don't need memory anymore for that job. So some of our scaffold memory by bypassing the need to use memory. They remember for us, so to speak. And I should say, when memory is scaffolded all of this way, it's not like nothing happens inside the head. What is inside the head changes, right? So I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but Plato thought, well, it's unclear whether it was Plato, but somebody that Plato wrote about in a dialogue, right, thought that the invention of writing was a disaster, an absolute disaster, because if things could be written down, human memory would be atrophied, right? So the idea here was that, here we have people who can remember, hundreds and hundreds of, rhymes, But now they can write them down so no one will remember them anymore, right? But we don't worry about that, right, any longer, right? But it is true that our ability to memorize things is probably atrophied compared to people in oral cultures that had to remember a lot. I mean, another example, although this is more procedural memory, think of those of you who knew how to drive a car before sat-nav. You probably knew how to go from A to B, right? Now many people just follow the sat-nav, right? And that has made a difference to spatial memory. So there have been studies on taxi drivers in London who have to take the knowledge test, and the space in their brain dedicated to spatial memory is significantly vaster than the rest of the population, right? So this scaffolding it enhances our ability, but does something to what goes on in the head. It doesn't leave everything unchanged, right? But to some extent, it doesn't matter because we can still do more, right? Human beings are lazy and miserly. The more we can do using the least energy, the more we like it. I mean, why sweat if you can do it while sitting down having a cup of tea, right? And so that is part of our, cultural evolution. We try to do more with less effort. And that is one of the ways we have scaffolded memory. We need less and less of our own brain power to achieve more and more. And so these scaffolds, right, change us. Right, so one of the things I'm not doing enough in the talk is talking about forgetting, but let me just say something. How do we forget? Well, we forget in many ways, but one of the ways in which we forget, and this is relevant to the talk about archives, is by destroying this memory aids. So I've told you that we remember by relying on tools. One way in which we can be made to forget is if our tools are taken away from us. If I offload all the memory of my phone numbers on my phone, if somebody nicks my phone, I'm done. If we offload memory of our lives and how great a Roman emperor we were to tablets, and the next guy didn't like us and they delete our name, then we get to be forgotten. The Romans had this tradition called damnatio memoriae, which meant that you would be literally erased from history, right? And of course, the more you rely on offloading your memory onto tablet, onto books, onto technology, the more the removal or the tampering with that technology will mean that you will be deprived of those memories, and other people after you will also be deprived. And so the tools, and also there can be tools that can be designed, to make people forget, right? So there can be tools in favor of forgetting, right? In a certain sense. So I've written a paper about something else that makes this point. If you keep going through your daily business and you're surrounded by monuments that tell you how great your soldiers were in war, how valiant they look, how wonderful your past was. There isn't much in that will trigger memories of fear, the drugs they were given so that they had the courage to go up the trenches, right? All of those things are elided by monuments that only encourage you to remember a certain selective aspect of the past and not another one. And so there can be cognitive aids or tools that encourage you to remember only one version of history and not another version of history. Not that the version of history that they encourage you to remember is false, it's just partial. And by not encouraging, or in fact, by hiding or obstructing memory of the other side of the story, they are cognitive aids in favor of selective forgetting. Right. So far I've told you that memory is very permeable, it's very constructed, that we often remember by offloading, so that tools do the memory for us, or that we use tools to help us strengthen our memory. And different tools do different memory jobs, right? And so, as I say, rhymes and tropes strengthen human biological memory, but diaries and calendars and alarms bypass human memory, right? And photographs, when they are not reportage, but they are the photos of your kids or the photos of your parents, what they do is they scaffold or aid retrieval, right? And memorials and monuments trigger commemoration, but can do so in a way that is very selective and partial, right? So different scaffolds or different aids help memory in different ways. They outsource it, they strengthen it, and so on and so forth. Or they strengthen in different phases, you know, the retrieval phase, the storing phase, right? And, you know, what is remembered is partly a feature of what cognitive aids you use. So, you know, if you use rhymes to remember a chronicle of the great history of your culture, probably there is a limit to how long this great history can be. But if you put it down in writing, it can come to 12 volumes, right? But that's because human biological memory is bypassed, right? And so this tool shape what is remembered, how much can be remembered, in what format it is remembered. Right, so finally, I got to the online platform. So what I've done so far is to try to convince you that what tools we use to remember really make a difference to how you remember and what you can remember, right? And for us, one of the biggest differences was the introduction of writing. And now we have another big difference, which is the ability. So the introduction of writing allowed us to write things down and putting it in archives and putting it in books. And one of the things that the writing of things did was that it did precisely what human memory can't do. Allow you to put down in an exact way something, nevertheless selective, for easy retrieval, provided that the archive was permanent enough, right? But now that we have digital archives and that we have social media platforms, it would seem that we have new means for remembering and forgetting. And what I'm going to talk about is how digital platforms, and especially social media, enable remembering in those two social functions of remembering I mentioned above, right? I say remembering is not just for having knowledge of the past. Remembering is also as a way of strengthening social bonds and as a way of constructing your own memories of your own life in order to get a sense of who you are and what you're about. And what I'm going to focus on is how social media platforms have changed memory for these two purposes: sharing, social bonding, and autobiography. As I said, on the assumption that what aids, tools we use change what and how we remember. Right, so how do we remember? What does it mean to say that we remember on Facebook or we remember on Instagram, right? Well, one way of remembering on Instagram is posting a picture of a past event, right, where you were there. Or, more commonly, reposting something that you posted in the past, right? And both Instagram and Facebook really encourage you to do this. So I don't know you, but every time I open Facebook, I get, memories. A picture of me usually on a sailing boat being like 20 years younger than I am now, sort of, or me at a conference in the States looking incredibly young, with my friends who are now all white-haired, not just white skin, looking like they are 20, right? And Facebook and Instagram too encourages you on this day, right? And so they show you what you posted previously, encourage you to share your memories, right? And so how do we remember then on these platforms? Well, we either, of our own volition, post something that represents a past event, or we repost something, either because something reminded us of it, or because we were prompted by the platform itself. Why are Instagram and Facebook really majoring on memory? They are majoring on memory, right? And Facebook, it's going, in the next 30 years, people think Facebook will have more accounts of dead people than accounts of living people that have been kept there by the friends of the dead as a way of remembering the dead, right? So Facebook and Instagram have majored on memory big time. Why do they do it? Well, the ultimate answer is because they make money out of memory, right? But why do we want to use Instagram and Facebook to remember, right? Well, because Instagram and Facebook are about sharing, right? They're about creating social bonds, are about having friends, right? And followers. And so social platforms are about strengthening, or at least giving the appearance of strengthening social bonds. And since how we strengthen social bonds is by sharing memories, it really isn't surprising, right, that we use Instagram and Facebook to share memories. We use them as a form of sociability, to create a community of friends and followers. And the way you create a community of friends and followers is by sharing, recollecting. And so it's not surprising that they major on memory. But how do we share memories offline? We share memories offline by cueing each other. So if you are with a friend and you say, oh, blah, 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 and you say, do you remember that time that we went to that bar? The beer was so disgusting. Where was it? And the other person says, I don't remember. But do you remember that there was that pink house just outside? And you say, oh, yeah. So it must have been in France. And the other say, oh, yeah. And, right? And in that way, by cueing each other, you will end up with a shared memory, right? And that memory might be partly true, partly false. It might be mostly determined by one person's memory, the one that did most of the talking, and so on and so forth. But the result is that in that process, you converge on a shared memory. And that memory is shared not because you and them have the same memory, but is shared because that memory is arrived at by a process of joint activity and constant feedback. That's why it's shared. And it's that process of joint feedback and joint activity that makes that activity of remembering as a way of creating a stronger bond between you and them. That's not what we do online, right? Online, when we remember past experiences, we post them to a majority of people who weren't there, and they can't offer mutual cueing. There is no feedback. There is no joint activity. And so, although the social networks want us to think that we share memories online, we don't. We disseminate memories online. We chuck them out there. But they are not shared, if shared means that they are arrived at by a process of joint activity. And that's why some people claim that people have never been so alone as they are together online, right? Because unless you already are friends with the person, and so the use of online media can be part of an ongoing friendship, this process of sharing is not a kind of joint activity that can support a sense of strengthening social bonds. And that's why people claim to be surrounded by millions of friends, but nevertheless extremely alone. And so social media are very good at creating connected selves that have lots of weak ties, like lots of acquaintances, right? But are not good at supporting the sense of we that can be built by sharing memories in the genuine sharing sense. We can talk more about this. I'm kind of speeding up because I'm aware I'm running out of time. But that's the first point that I want to make, that social platforms create connected selves with tons of weak ties, but not the sense of we that is required for shared memories. Sorry, that shared memories enable. That's a lot of people use social networks together with their friends in real life. So that is a different experience, right? I'm talking about people who only know each other online. The other, I think, big difference with memories on social media is that social media are present-oriented. On your feed, you see most recent things, right? And when you look at, and several sociologists have done analysis on this, when you look at how people share memories online, there is always a reference to the present. And so the idea is that there is a temporality of focus on the here and now, in Instagram, right? Instagram was about capturing the instant, the present instant. And now that it's used for memory, all those memories are always related to the present. That changes one way in which you understand your relation to your past. It's always punctuated in relation to the now. The other enormous difference is that you always post to the public, right? I know that you can direct message and you can only share with friends, but lots of people share on their feed to the public. And so that fact that your memories are disseminated to the public that you hardly know makes an enormous difference to what you post. Why? Because in some sense you censor yourself, right? Yeah, there are certain things you wouldn't post to a public, right? But also because you want your posts to be noticed, so they have to be attractive to the public, right? And so you will select those things that are suitable to become memories that the general public, and by general public I mean the people, you know, that follow you and that you follow, might find attractive, right? And so you are curating a story of your life in a way that makes it attractive to all and sundry. And what that means, all and sundry of your age group, they are like, right? What that means is that you're probably likely to post a story of your life that is much more stereotypical than it really is. Where stereotypical here, I mean stereotypical in accordance with the norms of your group. So if your group is, they don't exist anymore, I don't think, but if your group is goths, you'll be stereotypical goth. If your group is, I don't know, shoplifters, you'll be stereotypical shoplifter. I'm not saying stereotypical goodie, I just mean, you know, whatever goes for your group, you will just post a story of yourself as groupie. And that's how you'll remember yourself, right? And so memories online will be scattered. We don't post the same things in Instagram and Facebook, or at least I don't. They will be self-censored because you know everybody can see it. They'll be curated to appeal to the public. And the other thing is they will have a short format. No one writes a novel on Facebook, right? So they'll be short, punctuated, curated to appeal to the public, self-censored and scattered. What that means, and I just have to be fast, what that means is that these memories eventually construct your story of yourself to yourself. This is eventually how you will remember yourself, right? When you go back 20 years later, your memories on Facebook will be your memories, right? Those are the things you'll be able to retrieve. Those are how you will remember yourself. And you remember yourself in a way that is more scattered, right, than it was before, because you'll have your memories, some on Instagram, some on Facebook, rather than, you know, the diary that people used to keep, right? Will be less narratively structured. There won't be long diary entries, right? There'll be microblogging, instant photo. They will be more reliant on stereotypes, either because you presented yourself in a stereotypical fashion, or because the platform, right? I mean, my Facebook never chooses counter-stereotypical things on these memories, right? Facebook has me down as a philosopher and a sailor. So they only choose conferences and they only choose sailing trips, right? And so they will present to you a stereotypical story about your life, right? Unless the outcome of joint activity. What that means is that your own conception of the self will become more stereotypical and more episodic. And you will be less collective and more connected. If you think that's bad, remember Plato, who thought that the worst thing that happened to us was the invention of writing. It's not clear that this is bad. There are several philosophers who think that being an episodic self is better than being a diachronic self, right? So even if I'm right that these changes are occurring, or that we should expect them to occur, it's not clear that this is all bad. I do not know. It's certainly different. It could be better or worse. Probably most things are better in some aspects and worse in some aspects. But you never know. Some things might be just bad, and some things might be just good. So I do not know. But I leave you with that thought.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I just want to ask about one of the last things you said. So I'm beginning to study politics, and one of the things that I'm really interested in is tribalism and extremism. And just one of the things you said there about how memory is becoming less narratively structured, and we're more reliant on stereotypes. I was just wondering if you think this way of remembering events as certain groups might contribute to that. I don't know if I've worded that very well.
Right. So we seem to witness to polarization online. Some people disagree on this, but I tend to think that the polarization online, especially on social media, is especially effective polarization. So it's not clear that people hold more extreme views than they used before, or not as much. But what certainly is happening is that people hate each other more than they used to. Now, negative emotions, and by which I mean things like anger, hate, and so on and so forth, are more easily shared among weak ties, and weak ties means people who are not really your friend, you only know online, than happy emotions. There is some reasonably good evidence that joy doesn't travel online among weak ties. But joy not traveling online, what it means is if somebody posts some happy thing and you barely know them, you're less likely to repost. But if somebody posts something really angry and you barely know them, you're more likely to repost it and just feel vicarious anger. And so there is a sense. So I think that, right? So what I was saying is there is less sharing online, but you don't need, if that's right, you don't need sharing for bad emotions to spread. It is sufficient to have a sort of weak connection of some sort, which can create a certain kind of group identity, but not the same kind of we. Then there is also some evidence, but that used to be when our sharing online was more text-based, that causes some de-individuation effects, so that online people tended to be less individual and more stereotypical elements of their group. I think that might still be true in social media, but the strong evidence for this is from when people were using more text-based, right, less TikTok, Instagram, or Snapchat. But so if you have a combination of negative emotions traveling across weak ties, and you have this apparent sort of tendency to become a more stereotypical version of yourself online, you could see why you might end up with affective polarization. So does that sort of answer?
It does, yeah. Thank you very much.
I would, if you could please clarify what you meant by the stereotypical thing, because I didn't quite understand that.
Right. Okay. I'll give you an example, right, first. So there is a story that was there before social media, that a life consists of school and then relationship, marriage, career, and kids, right? And this is what you are expected. Your life is meant to go that way, right? So that is a common conception, is a stereotype of what a good life looks like. And so the sense then is that people, for instance, social media, construct their lives to look more like that. Or a stereotype of conception of what women should care about is they want to get married and have kids, right? This is the societal. One way of thinking of stereotypes is just to say, in this use, is just to say normative expectations of what people of that kind should behave like. There is a different notion of stereotype that is used in cognitive psychology, where a stereotype is a paradigmatic representation. So if I tell you dog, you are not likely to think Chihuahua, I don't think. You'll think sort of middle-sized dog with middle kind of ring. That's the stereotype of a dog. If you think biologist, sadly, you'll picture a white man of a certain. That's a stereotype, right? Those are the normative features, normative in the sense of it's societally expected that the biologist should have, right? So there are normative expectations what women should do. There are normative expectations of what manly men should do. And those are stereotypical views, right? And we all feel the pressure to conform to stereotype in general, because, you know, society makes sure that you're a bit shunned if you don't. The claim here is that on social media, because we want to be liked by a large number of people, we tend to play to the crowd, and we tend to play to meeting the crowd expectations, which tend to be stereotypical expectations. But of course, if your crowd is, I don't know, a crowd of MAGA, right, you will play to the MAGA stereotype. You'll become much more of a stereotype of yourself in order to meet expectations, because you want that like count to go up.
I understand that better, thank you. But also, isn't it your choice in the sense that you can try to comply to the stereotype if you wish to get that group to like you, but if you're using a medium, I mean, I don't have a Facebook account, never have, and I've only recently discovered Instagram, so I'm quite new to all this. But I've really enjoyed my Instagram account, which is only a few months old, because it's made me, you know, I'll go around and I'll suddenly see something that'll catch my eye that I think is interesting, and I'll take a photo, which previously possibly I might not have done. But having that ability to then, it almost becomes like an art form, and it makes it kind of interesting. So if anything, I feel like I'm becoming more aware, and it's sort of drawing me out in a sort of sense. But I don't have a particular public in mind when I take a photo, but then I will show what I think is interesting. So I don't feel like I'm complying to an image of what I should be posting.
Yeah, no, I agreed. So, you know, social medias have greatly enriched my life. I'm a migrant to this country, and, you know, WhatsApp has allowed me to talk to my mother every day for free, right? I have the privilege of seeing what my nieces do on Facebook, right? So I'm really keen to say I'm not against, and in many ways, there is very good evidence to show that these social media often are really composed of many different ecologies. You know, so for instance, I see very little of the vitriol sometimes on X, because I follow philosophers and cognitive psychologists, and all they care about is sharing their recent paper, right? And so in many ways, it really, you can to some extent create your own ecology and use these platforms for good use. I mean, I'm part of so many, you know, closed social groups on Facebook of academic philosophers where we exchange drafts and comment on each other's work, right? So, yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that there aren't these other uses that also seem to be common and perhaps more prevalent.
If social media is good for you to speak to your mother and see your nieces. The point you made was that social media is an additional tool to the relationship you've already got. And I think the point you've been making is if the only tool you've got is communication with a whole bunch of strangers who you don't really know, then you're going to be creating a self-image that looks in the mirror in terms of what other people think.
Yes, absolutely. But nevertheless, even so, even if you use social media as a way of supplementing, and many young people, God, I sound old, but many people do, right? So you see I see my nieces, right? They talk to each other, they talk to their friends, they are also messaging somebody else on the phone, which they are also sharing with the person who's right next to them, right? So in that process, that you have both online and offline all mixed up, and so is an additional tool, undoubtedly. And that's why I don't want the message of this talk to be negative, right? Nevertheless, I think it's interesting to think that when you're going, I mean, I remember because I sound, people going through, their photographs, maybe on their phones and so on and so forth. But I suspect now, sometimes I do it, I look at on this day on social media, or your memories, right? You might then, when 20 years from now, go back and look back at what you did that year, rely on this. And my thought is that to some extent that will be shaped by social media that doesn't necessarily have your interests at heart, but tries to make money out of you and tries to portray or impose on you, not because they are evil, although they might be evil, a certain stereotypical conception, right? Because the algorithm is, based on statistical generalizations. And there is a reason why stereotypes continue, is because they are broadly true. I mean, they are broadly true because they are self-fulfilling prophecies, right? So it's not like that women are this way because they are born this way. Women are made this way because, for various reasons, they meet stereotype, right? If you wear makeup and appear in a certain way, you, on average, get a higher salary, right? So there is a real rational incentive to appear that way. So stereotypes are largely true because they're self-fulfilling prophecies, and the algorithm, elaborates the stereotype and just throws it back at you. And so it will make your own memories of yourself even more stereotypical than they are. And that, it will do that to you because you are not going to remember yourself if you don't mind me saying, you like me are of a certain age, we can't, right? In order to remember stuff, we need help from photographs and so on and so forth. And we remember the things that back then we chose to photograph, and the things that back then we didn't choose to now we don't remember. The people who have grown with social media will do the same 30 years from now. And they will tend to remember the things that the algorithm tells them is worth remembering. And that, for better or worse, is a change.
I'm not sure if there's a short answer to this, but do you think that the social media platforms, probably specifically Facebook, have a moral obligation to keep accounts in perpetuity as the archivists of our memories?
It's right. So it's a really difficult question, right? So I know that it's true that there are more and more accounts of the dead. And the accounts of the dead are kept going often by relatives that keep them going. Do you remember, I do not, there isn't a clear answer. I do not know. I think they have an obligation to allow us to be forgotten, if that's what we want. It is, for instance, I don't remember how my account is set up on Facebook. I wouldn't want to be remembered after my death on Facebook. And I think they have an obligation, I think, to make it more apparent to us, to remind us what our wishes are. Like, we should have clear post-mortem wishes on Facebook. So that it's clear if we want to be forgotten or we want to be remembered. Whether they have an obligation, I don't know, because our digital traces on Facebook cost them money, right? And they make, so we are the product on Facebook, right? So they make money by selling us stuff through the advertising and by selling us to the advertisers because they collect information about our preferences. If I'm dead, I'm not making them any money one way or the other, right? Because I will not buy anything and I have no new preferences that they can sell. So I do not know that they could have an obligation since, you know, on the other hand, they might use us, right, to feed large language models, right? So that is a new, I don't know whether you're aware, but there is a big issue about the work done by human beings that is now fed into the large language models to train them, right? So all our academic papers, for instance, are in the public domain and they're often used to train large language models. So there is a question, I think, about our digital traces on social media. They are of less interest to large language models because of the short format and the photographic format. But nevertheless, there will be a question, for instance, of how, you know, how these digital traces are used, in which case they might make money out of you even after you're dead. And so maybe you can say, as a trade-off, you can keep me alive, digitally speaking. But I do not know. I do not know. But it's a complicated question that will become more and more pressing because there are more and more dead people on Facebook. And as fewer and fewer younger people have a significant presence on Facebook, there will be more and more dead people on Facebook with fewer and fewer users. And I do not know what will happen, right? Because there will be people who don't particularly use Facebook, but who have parents, dead parents on Facebook, right? And it might be a place where they want to go and visit. We used to go to cemeteries, right? We might now go to Facebook because I belong to a generation whose parents don't have a digital presence, right? But I have dead friends who have a digital presence. And I don't go there often, but sometimes I do, to see pictures of them and me when we were young, right? So it's becoming kind of cemetery, but it's unclear who has if anybody has the responsibility. You can, though, what they made it possible, archive everything. So you could create your own archive. If you have access to the account, you can download, I mean, it holds a lot of space, but you could download it for private use. So that could be a possibility that they give you a year where you can download it, but it's not the same thing anymore, I think. It's the going there to that space. The thing that is happening, then I'll stop. The thing that is happening, which makes it really problematic, because when I said I want to be forgotten, is that the moment you get forgotten because you choose to be forgotten, all your contributions as comments also disappear. And so the people who are remembered, you end up having feeds with only half of, right? So say you have a conversation and you're both dead, but you are remembered and you are forgotten. The forgotten contribution is gone, And the remember contribution is there, but speaking in the void because there is no response. So that also makes it complicated, because by you choosing to disappear, you're making coherent somebody else's feed. So it's complicated, I don't know. But as often is the case, there is a whole academic community that studies digital afterlives, is one of the most fast-growing studies of digital platforms, precisely because there is this ever-increasing number of dead accounts that are tombs, basically, that people visit. Sorry, I went on a bit, but it's a fascinating topic.
Hello. Yes. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and there was a professor who said that he had visited a house museum, and he posed after that he felt some kind of like a bond with the owner of the house museum, because he said there are some things that because of my identity I could tell that the person who was who lived in that house museum shared. And that came to the question of how ethical is it to out or divulge more personal details of someone's identity, of someone's past, especially if it's something that may have been considered wrong or criminal or unethical or problematic years ago, but it's not problematic now. And this professor posed a question, but there was no time for a discussion. And I had that same question like a couple of years ago, because I have an ancestor who moved to London to be a painter. And the scandalous issue of my family is, and he was a painter, and he may have had the mistress, because he painted this famous picture of one of his mistresses and said, yeah, he was a painter in the 19th century. And the thing is, but you shouldn't talk about that because it's family and it's personal matters. So what do you think about this idea? Like things that become obvious when you go through the archives, and do we have the right? Do we have the ethical, moral duty, obligation, or do we not? Or if it was something that the person chose to keep private, it should remain forever private?
So the answer, which is quite uninformative, is it depends. It depends whether the person you're talking about is a public figure or not. It depends on the nature of the thing that has been kept secret. So if the person is a public figure and the thing that is kept secret is their instrumental role in genocide, I think you have a duty to uncover this. If the person was a private individual who led their life and the secret was their sexuality, I think it is an open question whether you should retroactively out people, for instance. So I don't think there is a general answer to your question. It really depends on the nature of the secret and on the person.
I'm interested in the notion that when you're posting online, you're always posting onto a general public. Was your thinking that when people are posting privately, they're still performing this posting into publicness and kind of further stereotypifying themselves? And if that's something that's happening, how is that leaching into, I suppose, physical conversations? So when your nieces are talking to one another and they're also on their phones posting, are they also performing a public self rather than an intimate self when they're talking to one another?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I really don't know. So this idea, right, that social media have this strange private feel and yet is in public, right, has been written about. So it is true that most of these social platforms allow private messaging and so on and so forth, but a lot of the messaging is done to the public because, and this is, we want to be noticed, right? Social media, I mean, this is unrelated to my talk, but social media are attention economies, right? So you're there, like you're here in this room. I mean, you could walk out, but that is a bit embarrassing. So you have to listen to me, right? So I don't have to put an enormous amount of effort. I mean, I'm trying to say a few jokes, but you know, you're kind of captured. But on social media, you have to really fight to be noticed, right? And you see people posting things and then checking whether anybody noticed them. And if after 10 minutes no one has noticed them, you know that it's buried in their feed and no one will ever notice it, right? And so because you want to get noticed, that's why you're trying to post for the public. You're trying to maximize your likes. I think when people use social medias in that context where they're sharing pictures between themselves, it's not clear that they are trying to maximize in the same way. I mean, it's complicated. To some extent they are, but it's complicated because it's also doing something together with the person who is physically with them. So I think it's seamless in some way and might have very different effects. I was more interested in the fact in the reposting of on this day, where you don't repost it to the people who were there on this day, right? I mean, you could, because you know most of them are your friends on Facebook, right? But you don't. You just repost it, partly because you're lazy, and if you had to choose, you know. But you just post it to everybody. So there are ethical questions about reposting in this way, but you're reposting, so you are basically telling the world, look, you know, these are my mates, we did this, right? So you're kind of advertising yourself to the public. That's what I mean by, I don't know that posting something online when your friends are there and you're just all sharing the phone serves exactly the same purpose. So I think there might be a difference there, but I do not know.
Thank you for the talk. And my question will relate to the format that we discussed about. So I try to relate the upload image on the social media compared to photograph that for our parents took us. I think there's a difference in the sense of how the memory is given to us. For example, if parents take a picture of us, when we look back, oh, this is part of us. But when we post it ourselves, every time that we take a picture, I don't think it's more on we want to keep it as a memory, but more to construct our own identity towards the global. And that relates to your point that less collective and we become more stereotype. So my question is, I wonder, is it a healthy way to do, and how it will in the future when we look back, how it relate to our sense of self? Because every time when we talk about memories, first to reminding ourselves that who we are and still relating to now. And with the pictures that we download on the social media, is like the best picture image of self we can have. And actually, most of the time, it's not who we are all the time. It might be the selective 10% of our best and you want to share. And the thing that when we look back, this might be my hypothesis or my feelings, that when we look back, it's kind of like competition between our own self, that we got to be as good as we had, or if we have the suffer time, we wouldn't want to post it online because negative feeling, people might not want to see it, or people might would say like it that you say a bit of weak tight. Yeah, so my questions might be around how this is the healthy way, or how it will change the way we look at ourselves compared to other means of ads.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, no, thank you. So, yeah, I don't know. Look, people always say, right, that they're trying to put the best picture on, right? And where best usually means aesthetically more pleasing, but also means most likely to attract other people's attention, right? And so, if you compare that with taking a picture of a kid, right? You might have wanted to take the best picture of your kid. I mean, that's possible. But you might also just have wanted to take the picture of your kid at that point, right? And so that's how I think it changes. So but what I'm keen to sort of say, it's not that before people took accurate pictures and now people take fake pictures, right? Because people are always selected, right? Right? But before, and always try to sort of give a twist, right? But before, the twist was for one audience, the family, right? Now the twist is for a different audience, right? Your friends, and that would be fine because that has always been the case, but also your friends, right? And that really changes the dynamics. So I think we are in agreement. Now, what will happen in the future? I do not know. To some extent, it really depends how much people also have alternative forms of memories, right? So, one of the pictures I had was like all this plastic rubbish from London, right? It could be that people still have plastic rubbish from London, so that social media will not take over, and that there will be alternative ways, and then it will be an ecology where some of your memories are from digital and some of your memories are not, and that might be absolutely fine. My worry was if we overtly and almost exclusively rely on social media as our digital memories, what happens?
Alessandra, thanks so much for a very interesting talk.